Is my opponent ready? Beginning my 4 minutes now. Hello everyone, my name is Srivanth CON, and today I'll be debating on the con side of the resolution. Any restriction of speech is a restriction upon democracy. To begin my case, I would like to explain the resolution in depth. The word democracy means a system of government in which the whole population has the power to vote for their representatives, and the restriction of speech is something that you are not allowed to say. So a restriction of speech would not be restricting the power of the people of the government. According to the Google definition of democracy, it is a system where the people exercise their power by voting, but the restriction of speech doesn't take away this power. Unrestricted freedom of speech can also lead to hate speech, foul language, threats, spreading of false information, and incitement to violence. For example, people are using foul language and spreading false information, which could cause damage to another. This could also lead to violence or threats. Also, in modern society, there are already some restrictions in place, such as you cannot plagiarize other people, you cannot share obscene material, and you cannot restrict, and there are restrictions in school and working areas. Without these restrictions, people would be able to take credit for things they didn't do, say whatever they want in school and work, etc. Needless to say, this is taking undue advantage of the First Amendment. Some examples of plagiarizing would be if someone, for example, wrote a book, someone would be able to plagiarize that and take credit for that, which is not right and should be and is illegal. Without restrictions in schools and working areas, kids would be able to say whatever they want, which is not right. And in working areas, workers would be able to say and do whatever they want, which could lead to people becoming off task and not doing what they're supposed to. To recap my case, unrestricted freedom of speech can lead to hate speech, foul language, threats, spreading of false information, incitement to violence, plagiarism, sharing obscene material, and incitement to violence. I yield the remainder of my time to the judge.
All right, I have 4 minutes on the clock for our second constructive speech, beginning when you're ready.
Judges, are you ready? Opponents, are you ready? Beginning my time now. Hello, my name is Sumi PRO, and I'm debating on the pro side of the resolution, or topic of debate. Any restriction of speech is a restriction upon democracy. This debate will be scoped to the United States democracy. The resolution is a factual claim, so the team that wins should be the team that provides the best reasoning and evidence to confirm their proving or disproving of the factual claim. According to Merriam-Webster, the definition of democracy is a government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them through a system of representation. Additionally, Merriam-Webster states that the legal definition of speech is the communication of ideas through spoken or written words. In this case, the definition of restriction will be synonymous to abridgment. The First Amendment states, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. In reality, there are exceptional limits, such as avoiding inciting of illegal or harmful activities, certain obscene content, and true threats placed on the freedom of speech, meaning that Congress uses the word abridge to imply restrictions beyond these exceptions. The use of restrictions in this case, therefore, means limits beyond the exceptional situations, as that is how Congress uses restrictions, and Congress is the most legitimate political document in the United States government, which this debate is scoped to. Now let me begin with my constructive. Contention 1, basis of democracy. Subpoint A, participation in democratic processes. In democracies, especially in representative democracies, the expression of political opinions through acts like voting and expression through speech and peaceful demonstrations is the basis of representation. Once representatives are elected, free speech allows for citizens to be considered and appropriately represented in the nation. This free speech may include offensive or hate speech for expression purposes. For that reason, free speech cannot be restricted beyond the exceptions to allow democracy to serve its purpose. Subpoint B, protects democratic rights. Free speech is important if people ever feel that their democratic rights are challenged. According to Minneapolis Police Department policies, officers are not allowed to enforce fatal methods of criminal handling on minor crimes. However, this was violated in an incident involving a Black man, George Floyd, leading to his death. People felt that rights were not considered and could express their opinions on the matter, fueling a nationwide movement which led to the conclusion that the officer would receive charges of third-degree murder. Therefore, free speech is necessary to protect democratic rights, preserving a democracy. Contention 2, development of a government. Subpoint A, development of society. According to Britannica, resistance to apartheid in South Africa, notably South Africa's National Day of Protest, an anti-apartheid movement organized by Nelson Mandela's ANC party, was a peaceful movement in retaliation of a new bill to allow the investigation of any political party, a bill targeted towards the non-white population. At the time, apartheid, which is segregation between the white minority and non-white population, was legal and encouraged in laws. This is an example of free speech's influence in democracy, which led to further representation of non-white populations and the eventual end to apartheid. Subpoint B, controversial expressions importance. According to the History Organization, in 1924, the first documented gay rights organization was founded in Chicago. However, due to the criminalization of homosexual rights at the time, police raids caused the group to disintegrate due to inciting illegal activities. What controversial political opinions we think need to be restricted at the time could possibly be useful in the future, proving that free speech is necessary for development of a democracy. Possibly harmful statements or inciting of illegal activities would be protected under the exceptional limits, and therefore controversial opinions would not have to be restricted. To recap, my contentions are: Contention 1, basis of democracy. Subpoint A, participation in democratic processes. Subpoint B, protects democratic rights. Contention 2, development of a government. Subpoint A, development of society. Subpoint B, controversial expressions importance. Please cast your vote for pro. Thank you.
All right, we're going to go into a period of prep time. This is 1 minute long. That prep time is beginning now.
Is my judge ready? Beginning my time now. So in your first contention, subpoint A, you talk about the participation in democracy, but how does this relate to this resolution? Because the resolution is stating if any restrictions are restricting democracy.
This relates to the resolution because I'm stating that restrictions beyond the exceptional restrictions pointed out in the Constitution restrict democracy because speech is essential for the government to represent what people want, and speech is expression. And restricting expression unnecessarily does not allow for people to be represented, which undermines democracy.
Yes, I agree that speech is part of democracy, although this resolution isn't stating that we do restrict speech. It's stating if any type of restriction is. Are you aware of this?
However, I'm not sure if our definitions of restrictions are the same. The definition of restriction I use is synonymous to abridgment that Congress uses. And Congress states a restriction is anything beyond exceptional limits, because there are always exceptions. And Congress states Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. This is an absolute term. However, there are exceptions, and they are accounting these exceptions because
yes, I do agree with your definition of restriction. But what I'm saying is that participation, right? You said like free speech. We're not debating if free speech should be like taken away or not. We're not debating if it is going to be taken away. Are you aware that we're talking about in the resolution if any restriction of speech is restricting democracy?
I am aware of that, and I believe that's what my point was addressing when I was stating that because of how essential free speech is, we cannot restrict it beyond the exceptional limits because of how important it is to democracy.
Thank you.
All right, that concludes this first cross-examination. We're switching it up now, going into our second cross-ex. 2 minutes on the clock, beginning when you're ready.
Judges, are you ready? Opponents, are you ready?
Yeah.
Starting my time now. Do you agree that in this case, the resolution is a factual claim, as it is not stating if anything is good or bad, but is stating if something is the way it is?
Yes, I do agree.
Okay, thank you. Do you agree that hate speech and controversial opinions and protest is a form of expression?
Yes, it is a form of expression.
Thank you. Do you agree that hate speech and controversial opinions and protests that could come off as offensive could lead to changes in the government and politics?
Yes, it could possibly, but it won't always happen.
Okay, thank you. Do you agree that an organization for gay rights in 1924 would not be allowed to continue due to the criminalization of gay rights at the time?
Can you restate that?
Do you agree that an organization for gay rights in 1924 would not be allowed to continue due to the criminalization of gay rights at the time, even if it was peaceful?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Are you aware that gay rights are now important in society?
Yes, it is relevant in society now.
Okay. How do you respond to US Embassy article stating that expression is the basis of representation?
Yes, it is the basis of representation, except for this resolution is not about restricting free speech and expression. It is about if it is a restriction upon democracy, if it is any restriction.
I believe that the resolution states any restriction of speech is a restriction upon democracy, which is
Yeah.
stating that if we restrict speech, we are restricting democracy. And according to my definition of democracy, which is a government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them through a system of representation. If we restrict representation by restricting expression, we are restricting democracy. Moving on to my next question. Do you agree that demonstrations of free speech, such as the George Floyd protests, allow people to express when they feel their rights are being challenged?
Time is up.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we're going to go into a period of prep time. This is 2 minutes to prep for rebuttal. 2 minutes beginning now. All right, this prep time is concluded. We have 4 minutes on the clock for the first rebuttal, beginning when you're ready.
Is my judge ready? Are my judges ready? Is my opponent ready? Beginning my time now. Hello, my name is Srivanth, and I will be giving my rebuttal speech. To begin my rebuttal speech, I would like to touch up on a few things I would like to speak on some things previous that were in this debate previously. Next, I would like to state my line by line rebuttal, and then finally, I would like to recap my contention. To begin, I would like to state a few things about the resolution. The resolution, the first word of the resolution is any. It is stating that any type of restriction would be restricting democracy. The word any means would mean any out of all of the restrictions. So even if I point out one single restriction that restricts democracy, I should win this debate. Next, I would like to go into my line by line rebuttal. In my opponent's first contention, they talk about the basis of democracy. Subpoint A, they talk about participation. Except for, I agree that you would need to voice your opinion, express your opinions in order to participate in democracy. Except for this resolution is not a debate on whether free speech is good or not, or if free speech should be taken away or not. This debate is about if any restriction is restricting democracy, and we are not, and this is part of democracy, but we're not restricting it. So I don't see how this relates to the resolution. Subpoint A, she said that it protects democratic rights, although this is the same thing. We are not taking away any rights of free speech. We're saying if it's being restricted or not. In contention 2, she talked about the development of government. Subpoint A was the development of society. Once again, we are not restricting speech, and we're saying if it is being restricted, if it's restricting democracy. Next, I would like to recap my contention. Unrestricted freedom of speech can lead to hate speech, foul language, threats, spreading of false information, and incitement to violence. For example, people are using foul language and spreading false information, which could cause damage to another, which could also lead to violence and threats. Finally, I would like to state how I'm winning this debate so far. The first thing is that my opponent has failed to have valid arguments relating to this resolution. A lot of my opponent's arguments are based off of free speech and would go well to a debate about if free speech is good or not, or if free speech should be removed or not, but this debate is not debating that, which is why I think I'm winning this debate so far. Thank you. I yield the remainder of my time to the judges.
All right, I have 4 more minutes on the clock for our second rebuttal, beginning when you're ready.
Judges, are you ready? Opponents, are you ready? Beginning my time now. To remind, this debate should be judged based on whichever side brings the best data and evidence supporting or disproving the likelihood of the restriction of speech being a restriction upon democracy being true. Additionally, in the cross-ex, my opponent stated that he agrees with my definitions. However, later in his rebuttal, he stated that that his definition of restrictions is obsolete and is different from my definition. I oppose his definition of restrictions because the Constitution itself uses restrictions in a way to imply restrictions beyond the exceptional cases, to avoid a burden where a single counterexample can dissolve the entire point. I quote from the Constitution, "Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech." Although no law is an absolute term, Congress uses this not absolutely, and it uses it generally, and it uses it to not include the exceptional cases, because there are always exceptions to a factual claim, especially in the manner that we are debating here. So for that reason, it is unreasonable to say that restrictions is for any restriction, any possible restriction. And the Constitution itself uses this definition of restrictions, so it is the most legitimate restriction and most appropriate most appropriate definition to use in this case. In the cross-ex, my opponent numerously brought up the point that many of the points I was making was not relevant to the resolution. He stated that I was stating that free speech is good, but I was not proving that that restricting it is a restriction upon democracy. However, the point I was making is that if we restrict speech, we are restricting representation, to which he agreed in the cross-ex. And according to my definition of democracy, which is that the supreme powers vested in the people and represented in the government, restricting speech would restrict democracy if it restricts representation. He did not respond to this point appropriately. Now, let me begin with my line-by-line rebuttal. My opponent's first contention is foul language. And in this point, he talks about how foul language can lead to violence or threats. However, if foul language is not used in a term that puts other people in direct threat, such as true threats, which is, again, protected under the exceptional limits that the Constitution already points out. So when I refer to restrictions, I'm not referring to that. But foul language, as long as it does not threaten anyone, or as long as it does not incite illegal activity, foul language is a method of expression, and expression is important to representation, as my opponent has agreed in the cross-ex, and representation is the basis of democracy, as I pointed out in my contention 1 subpoint A. And additionally, he goes on to mention obscene content, incitement of illegal actions, and plagiarism are important restrictions on freedom of speech. However, this falls under the exceptions that I have mentioned, and because of this, I will not address these points as I do agree with this, but these are the few exceptions that are needed to be on the freedom of speech, and the Constitution itself agrees with these points, though they do state there are no restrictions on speech, because they mean in general, and they mean beyond these exceptions. Now let me recap my contentions. My contentions are: contention 1, basis of democracy; subpoint A, participation in democratic processes; subpoint B, protects democratic rights; contention 2, development of a government; subpoint A, development of society; subpoint B, controversial expressions importance. Currently, I believe that Pro is winning this case because I've addressed each of my components' points from the exceptions that he has brought up and also from the foul language point that he has brought up. Additionally, I have addressed his accusation of me not my points not being relevant to the resolution, with showing that my points are indeed relevant to the resolution. And for these reasons, please cast your vote for Pro. Thank you.
All right, we're going to go into a period of prep time, 2 minutes to prepare for summary. That 2 minutes is beginning now.
Are my judges ready? Is my opponent ready? Beginning my time now. Hi, my name is Srivanth and I'm debating on the con side of this debate, and I'll be giving my summary speech. To begin my summary speech, I would like to address framework, Next, I would like to recap my case. After that, I would like to address something from the rebuttal, and then finally, I would provide you with the list of voters. First, the framework. My opponent has stated that this debate should go to the team that provides more reason side, and I agree with this. Next, to recap my contentions. Unrestricted freedom of speech can lead to hate speech, foul language, threats, spreading of false information, and incitement to violence. For example, people are using foul language and spreading false information, which could damage to another. This could also lead to violence or threats. Next, I would like to address something from the above. The resolution states that any restriction, keyword any, is a restriction upon democracy. A restriction could be something as small as not being able to say something in school. This is any restriction and this is not restricting democracy. Next, I'd like to give you guys some voters. Voter 1. My opponent's arguments weren't very relevant to this case. A lot of them were mainly about free speech and how this relates more to free speech compared to this case. Next, my final voter is that my opponent has not rebutted any of my restrictions. Has not rebutted any of my restrictions. Thank you. I yield the remainder of my time to the judge.
All right, I have 3 minutes on the clock for our final summary, beginning when you're ready.
Judges, are you ready? Opponent, are you ready? Beginning my time now. To remind, this debate should be judged based on whichever side brings the best data and evidence supporting or disproving the likelihood of the restriction of speech being a restriction upon democracy being true. My opponent agrees with my framework. However, he does not agree with my definition of restrictions, implying beyond exceptional situations, and does not acknowledge that the Constitution itself defines restrictions in this way. Additionally, he has not provided a strong argument against how the burden against PRO with his definitions would be addressed otherwise. To recap, my contentions are contention 1, basis of democracy. Subpoint A, participation in democratic processes. Subpoint B, protects democratic rights. Contention 2, development of a government. Subpoint A, development of society. Subpoint B, controversial expressions importance. Now let me weigh my impacts in my case against my opponents. My opponent's first contention, and only contention, I believe, to my knowledge, is foul language. And in this contention, he states how foul language can lead to violence or threats, and obscene content, incitement of legal actions, plagiarism, etc. should not be allowed. And there should be restriction of speech in schools and the workforce, etc. However, I addressed this many times in my rebuttal by saying that, number 1, foul language does not necessarily lead to violence or threats, because true threats is actually protected against the exceptional limits in the Constitution. And foul language other than this is allowed because it is a form of expression, and restricting expression, like I've stated in my contention 1 subpoint A, would restrict representation, as representatives of our government get less input from the nation. So because of this, when there's less representation, there's less democracy. So I have addressed this point in my case. Compared to my contention 1, basis of democracy, and subpoint A, participation in democratic processes, and subpoint B, protects democratic rights, I show how expression is important for representation and important for democracy and important for preserving democracy through signifying how important democratic rights are to the nation. And my contention 2, development of a government, subpoint A, development of society, and subpoint B, controversial expressions importance, I talk about how expression, even how controversial or even how foul it is, as long as it doesn't threaten someone or put someone in a situation that could bring up illegal actions, it is a form of expression, and the government can use this form of expression to represent the nation. Now let me list the reasons pro 1. Number 1, more appropriate definitions. In this case, the definition I use for free speech is more appropriate as it is the one that the most legitimate document in the US government, which this debate is scoped to, the Constitution uses, which is that restrictions refers to limits beyond exceptional situations pointed out by the Constitution. This is because there are always exceptional situations. Number 2, relevance to resolution. And number 3, more airtight case. Please cast your vote for pro. Thank you.
All right, and that concludes this debate.